Welcome, everybody, to another show of The Passion Within. We've got David August. Oh my God, I'm not going to even try, David. I'm sorry, brother. But this gentleman from the Art Farm UnIncorporated, the UNI Fungi, the Southwest Funga Fest, and Gray area is amazing with mushrooms. He grows them, eats them, hunts them down on the side of a mountain. David, what the hell are you doing climbing trees out there, brother? I mean,
Uh,
you're crazier than I am.
yeah. You know it. Just out there connecting with nature, living my passion since the moment I can remember. But mushrooms didn't come into play probably until like 2014. I mean, I had some adventures with them in my early teenage through college years, of course. But as far as like the functional mushrooms and the gourmet mushroom side of things, it didn't come in until about 2014, my first year at Telluride Mushroom Festival. So yeah.
So, how are you enjoying the mushroom festivals? I know you were actually in not only just going to the mushroom festivals, but you were actually part of the association, and I believe you were president of a couple of the associations for a few years. How did you get into that?
So essentially at the time I had my degree in architecture. I was kind of just traveling the world trying to figure out my path. Got back into the trades just because it was what I knew and it was good money. And so somewhere along the way, we were hanging out with one of my buddies, and he mentioned my friend Eamon Circus up in Grand Junction. He was mentioned the Telluride Mushroom Festival. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Let's go check it out. And so me and my wife went. Young love at the time, still going out partying, having a good time, and kind of rolled into Telluride with no expectation, kind of thinking, festival party, woohoo, and then definitely got the download of a century, right? Boom, mine just opened up. You could do so many things with mushrooms. Myco remediation really hit at the time because I was getting into like sustainable living, how to be self-sustained, grow my own food. Um, Being in architecture school, it really had like the whole green movement was starting to become a thing, and green building and sustainability and all these new systems that I had never interacted with before were like now in my presence. And so like I went to Telluride, I heard about myco remediation, I heard about hundreds of species of mushrooms you could eat, and at the time I had two interactions with mushrooms. One was like slimy canned mushroom that I was like, nope, never gonna eat mushrooms again. And then like a cracker dry mushroom that I was able to get my hands on at a certain point in life. And Telluride was just like boom. And then from there I was like, wow, I really want to do this mushroom thing, in the first year. And so I came back to New Mexico. I started looking into like schools. Maybe I would go to school. At the time, it was like Washington Evergreen was like the only place that had mycological studies. And there was like a school on the East Coast. I don't know the name of it right now, but they offered a few mycological courses. At the time, I didn't want to move from New Mexico. I didn't want to leave, so I thought, okay, let's get involved. Let's find a club or something. And there happened to be a club, New Mexico Mycological Society, and they were really wanting some momentum, and so I inserted myself and like volunteered at I was like, well, maybe I'll be the vice president. I don't think I can do the president right away. I've only kind of seen the club for about 4 or 5 months. We're at this old older woman's house, Barbara Marigold, who hosted the meeting at the time, and I didn't even know what I was getting myself into at the time, but I signed up to be the vice president, and quickly the ball just started rolling.
Well, that's fantastic because there's a lot of people that won't take that first step to even get involved. But I love how you went from, consuming mushrooms for a different reason and then moved into the gourmet mushrooms and finding out more about the health benefits of mushrooms. Like, I know I follow Paul Stamets quite a bit, and his journeys were just amazing. I was just I was in BC for a while. We used to go up in the mountain and pick mushrooms
Oh, sure.
at the right time, but I never really got into the gourmet mushrooms. And now there's so much knowledge on the medicinal mushrooms. Can you let us know some of the benefits of some of the different mushrooms that you are growing and selling on your website? Because I know you've got some of the reishi, the tiger tail, but I think a lot of people don't understand just how beneficial fungi can actually be.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's tons of applications for mushrooms as far as medicinal value goes. I mean, that's not necessarily my main focus. I do like the term functional mushroom better. One of my friend Alex Dorr from Mushroom Revival actually uses the term functional a lot more. You know, when we hear medicine, I think especially where we're at in the world, in the United States, we think of medicine and we think of like, oh, you know, we're gonna pop a pill, we're gonna go see the doctor in the white coat, we're gonna get the cure, and that's medicine, right? And that's our idea of medicine. And so like adopting the concept of functional, you know, over a prolonged period of time, if you interact with this organism or this herb or whatever it is, you know, it takes a little while, but after a while, the idea is that it will improve your function, right? So like I kind of like to use the term functional mushroom, but yeah, there some of these mushrooms and some of these organisms are producing compounds and enzymes that are like not found in by any other organism. You know, shiitake, for example, is producing tons and tons of amino acids. I think someone said 16 amino acids, 9 of the beneficial amino acids for us. And so no other organism on this planet is producing that many amino acids, right? And so cordyceps is a really special one. It produces a compound called cordycepin, and can't remember, I think it's in the name of the compound, but it kind of mirrors like it mirrors our adrenaline, and so it's kind of like free energy source, right? Cordyceps, but it has a whole other list of things, right? It's a holistic lung medicine. I feel like my wife had asthma when we first got together. She started taking cordyceps a lot, hasn't used an inhaler in like 4 or 5 years, you know. There's tons of stories about turkey tail and its implications for like cancer research. There's a really special mushroom called the lion's mane that produces like these compounds called erinacines, and these erinacine compounds are really good for neuro regeneration and basically going into the tips of the mylar and helping us regrow new neurons and like all kinds of really cool potential things. You know, reishi, the mushroom of immortality, just keeps proving, you know, since ancient Chinese medicine and herba medica, they've been using the reishi, the lijing, or a Ganoderma species in general. You know, we don't know exactly which one it was, but it was definitely in the Ganoderma genus. So that mushroom's been around for a really, really long time. I mean, Cordyceps sinensis that they find out in the high mountains in the Himalaya, in the Tibet and Nepal and stuff like that. And so I don't know if you can see it, but it's like,
Yeah, if you put your hand behind it, we might not get the glare. Oh, there you go.
yeah, and so that's growing right off of a caterpillar pupae, and that's a super highly medicinal mushroom that, you know, sometimes in America I think we're traditionally making out of tea, but my buddy who went to Nepal and actually sourced these told me to just eat it, caterpillar and all, crunch crunch crunch, and he's like, but it is a highly potent aphrodisiac, so be prepared is what he told me. And I was like, okay, so I'm just waiting for the day to eat that one. But I mean, the implication goes on, like, right, there's protein they're finding a lot in a lot of oyster mushrooms, there's a lot of fiber in turkey tail. I mean, as we interact with these organisms more and more and more, I think the list is just going to unravel. You know, a great book, I might have it right over here, but
Yeah, we always love to know what books have brought you along, what books we can get onto to help us out.
yeah, as far as like functional mushrooms, I would say this is like top notch in the world. This is Robert Rogers. the fungal pharmacy. It pretty much goes into all the medicinal uses, and there's tons of other books I could rant about, but that one, if you really want to know the medicinal implications, that's a great start. And then from there, just keeps going and going and going and going. And I think, again, like, as science unravels and allows us to have access to more of the scientific side, I think maybe there's going to be a little bit more credibility that hasn't been there for some of the mainstream. But not saying that the mushrooms haven't been here the whole time, like helping out, doing crazy things like filtering all kinds of pollutants out of the planet, and like providing a space for other microorganisms to even make their way onto land. And so, like, mushrooms have been here for a really, really long time, and we are just like, we're lucky enough to be alive, to have a conscious connection with their presence, and them to tell us, like, hey, we are here, and like, and like, I just feel like there's a big disconnect from that. But we've been connected to them for so long. If you look at like penicillin and a lot of our novel compounds, and a lot of the foods that we first started eating, like bread, for example, and beer. People love their beer. People love cheese. All those things come from a yeast, which are in kingdom fungi, right?
Okay, now I didn't actually realize that yeast was from that side of the spectrum. Like, I know when I was studying or looking at Paul Stamets' work, and he was talking about the mycelial network and what it can do, how it literally breaks down rocks and creates soil. And like, he was saying that that was really the beginning after the last ice age of bringing soils back to the places where the ice had stripped the soil off the surface, and it was the mycelium that started bringing things back to life. But I didn't realize that it went that far. How can you explain to a lot of people that are going to watch this aren't going to understand about mycelium, and that the mushroom is actually the fruit of the plant, just like the tree, an apple tree, the
Sure.
fruit is the apple. Can you explain to people a little bit more about the mycelial network?
Yeah, no, totally. And so I kind of try to reference it and frame it in a sense for people like this. So you can imagine a tree, and you have a tree, and then you have the root system, and there's a giant tree with its roots, and that's the whole organism, right? So we have an entire organism there. And on that organism, you get a pine cone, you get a fruit, or you get a flower. And I like to call those the reproductive organ of that larger organism. And then in that reproductive organ, usually at the end of the life cycle, there's a seed that forms inside of the fruit. The seed forms inside the pine cone. And sometimes the seed forms inside of the flower. I like to call that seed the reproductive cell of the reproductive organ of the organism itself. And so let me see. So here I have a pretty good example for this, actually. So let's see, I'll turn this off real quick. Oops. And so this white stuff that you're seeing in this bag, if you can see it, this is all, let me turn that light off. No, it doesn't work either way. But anyway, this bag is full of
Oh, there you
mycelium.
go.
Yeah, this bag
Yeah.
is full of mycelium. And this is white hyphal threads. It's this white tissue-like thing that looks like a spider web, and it has these hyphal threads, hyphal little tips, and they're digesting different bits of material. And so the mycelium is like that tree, right? It's a giant organism. Sometimes we can't see it. Sometimes it's underground, living in the soil, what we call mycorrhizal. Sometimes it's eating wood, and that's what we call a saprophytic mushroom. It feeds on dead and decaying matter, whether it's agricultural waste, whether it's wood, whether it's dung, whether it's all kinds of dead and decaying matter, and then sometimes the mycelium will take over and attack a living organism, sometimes trees, sometimes bugs. Those are entomopathogenic fungi when they're attacking a bug. So anyway, right, we have this mycelium, and that's the organism itself. And what you saw here too, you saw these giant mushrooms growing, right? So the
Beautiful.
mushrooms are just like the piece of fruit, the pine cone, or the flower, right? It's the reproductive organ of that organism. So the mycelium is the organism, the mushroom is the reproductive organ, and then on that mushroom, we have a little gill, right? We have gills, if you can see those. Yeah, I think you can
Yeah.
see those gills. Yeah. And then on those gills, we have the little spores. So each one of this is called a basidiomycota. And so each little gill has these little basidia that come off. They're usually microscopic, so it'd be hard to kind of see on the camera, but each gill has tons of basidia. And then on those basidia, there's like 2 to 3 basidiospores. And so you can imagine each gill has like thousands and thousands and thousands of spores. And so the spores are like the seed, they're the reproductive cell. And it only takes one tiny, tiny microscopic spore to land in the ideal condition, and that mushroom can recreate life. And so just like most organisms, right, the mycelium's digesting, it's living sometimes for years, I think, before they deemed this aspen grove the largest organism on the planet. Before that, it was the humongous fungus. It was called Armillaria ostea, and it was in the Malheur National Forest up in Oregon, right, as the largest living organism, which is actually what some people call parasitic fungi, which is attacking the living organism. But I don't like to use the term parasitic. I think it associates a bad thing, and I don't think
Yeah.
necessarily we understand the whole ecological role at play. I think we overlook things. So anyway, that mycelium is, there's vast networks everywhere you look, right? They're all across the forest. I think Paul Stammen says every footstep you take, there's like so many square foot of mycelium, hundreds of square feet of mycelium in every step you take in the forest. And so there was a term coined, the wood wide web, for a while, right? And that's the mycelium living in syntropy and living coexisting with all these trees, and they provide this special symbiotic relationship where the mycelium starts mining the carbon, and then it's like feeding the carbon to the rootlets of the trees and the plants, and then the plants are like sucking out the sugar and giving the sugar to the mycelium because the mycelium wants the sugar, right? And so like it goes further back to say, like, oh, you talked about like the bridge of life on the last ice age. Well, it could have been even before that, right? It could have been way before, like when panspermia happened and this giant comet with all the building blocks of life, boom, crashed into Earth, destroyed everything. And so like NASA did this test. I don't know exactly where the test is anymore, but they take these artificial meteors, and then they inoculate them with spores, fly them into space, release them into the vacuum of space. I think they did it for different time measurements, and then they brought that artificial meteorite back into the lab to see if the spores could be viable. They were able to scrape the spores and make them viable and grow that mycelium on agar, right? So it's very plausible that there was spores on a comet that crashed onto Earth. Boom, these spores were spread out on this probably like had water at the time. I still think that water is like the oldest thing besides like, the Earth, the actual elements of the Earth. And so, boom, it crashes, the spore lands in this ideal condition. There's like 5 fungal needs. We won't get into that. So the spore lands, boom. And now, now it's just, there's no plants at this time, in my opinion. This is all just a theory I heard a while back. I wish I knew who wrote this theory and could give them credit. But right, the spores land, and then now this hypha develops, and there's this mycelium growing, and it starts mining mycorrhizally mining the minerals on Earth, and like, because it can digest rocks, right, and it can digest these things. And so it's like sitting there digesting them. And then over here in this water, we got this salt water, and we got this fresh water, and we got these estuaries where the salt water and the fresh water meet. And then there's this like hyper concentration of microorganisms and all this bacteria and all this stuff that's just here in the atmosphere, right? All this biology we don't see. And all of a sudden, something from the estuary floats up, and all these microorganisms are now in the ocean, right? And then the oceans and maybe some of these freshwater sources have some of the same thing going on, right? But these mycorrhizals are on the shore, but they don't know how to interact. And then next thing you know, boom, this microorganism interacts with this mycorrhizal species that's like, and they're like, hey, how can we utilize each other's resources and interact? If you look at like algae, if you look at lichens and things like that, right? It's a symbiotic relationship between fungi and cyanobacteria or something to that degree, right? So all of a sudden okay, maybe all these things start interacting with each other and creating like these symbiotic non-vascular plant forms, right, that have no root systems and things like that. And eventually, they start making their way on, and whatever happens down the evolutionary tree, I don't know, but I do know there's a big chance in my eyes that the mushrooms and the mycelium were here long before there was plant life, right? There's a study where they found this fossil called Prototaxides in Saudi Arabia, and they actually found it in Saudi Arabia, and you can look at the guys, and it's this giant, like massive thing, right? And so they think at one point in time there's these huge giant trees, but they're not trees, they're more like giant shrumpy lumps. There's these big protrusions out of the earth, and they're like, oh, these giant mushrooms, and they call it Prototaxides. And so somebody did do a PhD dissertation on like whether it was lichen, algae, or fungus, right? And I think if I remember in my research, he was leaning more towards fungus at the end of it, right? Like there's a lot of evidence both directions, but either way, the fungi is still present, even if it is a lichen, even if it is an algae, right? And so eventually you start to see things like, liverworts and ferns and all these non-vascular plants making their appearance. And then all of a sudden, whoa, like we compare with these things that have already been here, like creating a nutrient, like biological, like warfare for us to just like set down. And then all of a sudden someone was like, huh. And then all of a sudden, so like this idea that plants evolved from fungus makes more sense in my eyes than, fungus coming off the branch or the tree of life of plants, in my personal opinion. But
well, I think I have to agree with you on that 100%. I know the one study that really freaked my brain out when I was looking at mushrooms was the Japanese were looking at the most optimal route for their subway system.
oh, sure.
And so they had all the engineers, the best in Japan. We want the optimal route, and then somebody put together a model with the same rocks, etc., that would be need to drill through, and they put mycelium in there, and the mycelium beat out all these fantastic engineers for the optimal route. That tells me like there's something a lot deeper than what we're believing what's going on. But I just want to bring up Silly Lily's statement here for you. Mushrooms and woodpeckers are good indicators that your tree has reached maturity and it's on its way to breaking down. Is that true? Is that can be a good indicator when your tree is starting to fail, that it starts developing mushroom bodies?
Oh, well, again, it's like I haven't had the time to go out in the field and observe that, because I think to like observe a mycelial body taking over a tree, it's a really long process that, I wouldn't say yes. I mean, yeah, if your tree's dead and there's woodpeckers and it falls over, that's a good indicator that the mushrooms are breaking it down. It's, I've seen mushrooms definitely take a standing dead tree down, and you can see mushroom bodies. But yeah, if you're seeing mushroom bodies, depending on the type of mushroom, right? Specifically, like I said earlier, there's saprophytic mushrooms, which job is specifically to break down material. So if you study your mushrooms a little bit and you have a little bit of ID skills, then you can say, oh yeah, this oyster is a saprophytic mushroom, so it's definitely feeding on this dead and decaying matter. Now, if you look at something like Sporispa crispi, which is like or crispus, Sporispa crispus, I don't know my Latin super good, but that's called
Better than mine.
that's the cauliflower mushroom, right? And so that's feeding on a living host tree, usually a pine down here where we can find them. And so
so some are more of a symbiotic relationship with the tree, and some are going to be breaking down the tree. So it's knowing what type of mushroom it is to know if it's going to take your tree down. Like I know she had mentioned turkey tail on her willow tree. Would that be an indicator, or is that one that's got a symbiotic relationship?
Yeah, and turkey tail is definitely an indicator that it's breaking down. That's a saprophyte as far as I've seen and observed in nature. Now I've seen like bracket fungi on living trees, and like for me to understand all the biology that was happening in that little, like this is like a microcosm of a microclimate. So it's like, whoa, what's going on? You can look at this dead stump and see like 4 mushrooms and then like a tree growing out of the dead stump, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, crazy, crazy. And so yeah, again, I think it's just like, I think chicken of the woods, I think maitake, I think all those grow definitely with a host tree that's alive. And so that might be, that's all East Coast mushrooms. I can't speak particularly for those. But yeah, I think it definitely depends on, what's going on in the ecology in general as well. And so, but yeah,
So would you suggest she go out and she get that book that you showed us, learn a little bit more about the different mushrooms, and then she can base a more factual reference using that knowledge, so we can all do that. I think that might be a good way to for somebody to start.
Yeah, I mean, picking up a book and looking at your local guide specifically, like
Yes.
again, I said like, yeah, those other mushrooms over there on the East Coast, but like they don't grow over here as far as I know. I think the closest we could get to chicken of the wood is like a Latiperolis, a cinnabaris or something like that. And that's like that grows as close as Arizona to me in New Mexico. So again, I still haven't got to like interact with that mushroom, but joining your local club is probably going to be the most wealthful information, because there's like experts who you can go out with, and then like they can kind of teach you some foraging ethics, or just like it depends on, again, like what is your outcome. I have fascination with fungal preservation, so like I'm the one guy who's in the field, like picking almost every mushroom I see and saving it and taking field notes. And like, if you're going on a foray with me, you probably won't get that far unless I tell you we're going for food specifically, because, but I think over the years, I've developed a method to where I can now do both simultaneously. But definitely going out with your local experts, getting involved with the club, they're going to tell you what's available right away in your bioregion and kind of give you like some indicators of what's good. And then you buy a local field guide. Yeah, there's like guides that are like pretty traditionally used throughout mushroom hunting in general. Like this is like a linchpin for like every mushroom hunter is like David Aurora's All That the Rain Promises and More. That's by David Aurora. Oh man, what is the light? So
Down just a little bit. We can't quite see the title, so put it up closer to the camera.
Oh,
And
there he is.
down, David Aurora, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like All That the Rain Promises and More. And
Oh,
so when I
perfect.
joined my local club, like the local foraging magi essentially told me, get this book, read it, front to cover, front back to front. And I was like, okay. And like I bought the book and I like opened it and I'm like, yeah, it's just pictures, just literal pictures with descriptions. There's not much to read here. And she's like, exactly. You read that and then you read it 3 more times back to front. And I'm like, okay. And like Where I am at now in my journey, I would say like taxonomically, we've come a long way with like gene sequencing and stuff like this, but like it gives you an idea of common names and species and genus and like how to work with a binomial nomenclature and a two-part naming system. That's what binomial nomenclature means. It's how we name things in Latin and scientifically. It's usually genus first and then species. And Latin's kind of like that universal language, right? And my camera's all, what happened when you zoomed in? And so, yeah, it gets us working with that binomial nomenclature. And then, of course, having that bioregional, exact
species for your area.
Yeah, like ours is mushrooms of the Rocky Mountain region, by Vera Evanson. If you're in New Mexico or the Rockies, this is a great one. Vera Evanson.
Now I'm just west of the Rockies in Alberta. Would that basically should be my area as well? How far east would you think that would go for someone in North America, where it would be at least similar, or a companion's guide?
I mean, that's the cool thing about mushrooms. We can't really say right now. Your best bet would like iNaturalist or go onto one of these like databases, Mushrooms Observer or something like that, and see what's popping up in your region. But realistically, again, going to the club and they're going to tell you what guide works best for your area. There's that general, all that the rain promises and more. That's kind of like everybody starts there. I would say easy place to start, and then to like move forward. But as far east, again, it's really hard to say, especially for somewhere like New Mexico, because we have so much like diversity and elevation and like just like bioregion and climate and like microclimates, and like we go from super semi-arid to like crazy monsoon wet season. And so like having all this adaptability and crazy fluctuations and even temperature, right? Like it's 10 degrees right now, and in the summer it gets up to like 100, in the city. I'm on the other side of the mountain from the city, so it's like this weird 10 degree buffer zone just from where I live and the city on the other side. Again, it's like super high mountain desert, yucca, deserty plants on that side, and then on this side it's like a forest, like a pinon pine down here. It's pinon pine,
Yeah.
and then you drive less than 3 miles from my house. In 8 miles, I can go from 6,800 feet to 10,800 feet in
Yeah.
7 miles. Driving in my car, and I can see it go from that juniper pinon kind of high mountain desert rocky stuff to now we're in ponderosa pine, we're Douglas fir, we got aspens, like, so it's like very 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 different. And then again, you drive 30 minutes west and you're in the city, and it's like this whole this valley, the Rio Grande Valley, right? And so it's like, holy moly, in a 100-mile radius, you got like 5 different microclimates here. So it's hard to say. Even the southern part of the states get a whole different type of mushrooms. And again, a lot of this hasn't been mapped. The diversity, there hasn't been a lot of efforts. I think like as far as like conservation efforts, there's like 512. Let me see. I'm gonna look it up. Sorry, I don't know exactly right now. But as far as like conservation effort goes, I think it says something right here. Only 358 conservation priorities. There's only been 358 assessments by the International Union of Conservation of Nature, right? That's all the conservation of nature. There's 350 species assessed for fungi. There's 76,000 species of animals and 44,000 species of plants. And if you look at the actual numbers, there's between 2.2 and 3.8 million species of fungi out there. I'm going to say that again. 2.2 to 3.8 million species of fungi out there, and we only got 358 in our conservation efforts for all of nature. And so like there's like, that's why like it's huge, it's so important to be involved. Like there's so many unidentified species in this kingdom and queendom, you know, the funga kingdom, you know. There's just, it's a vast network. Like Paul would say, it's the overarching, you know, the most underappreciated mega science out there, you know. Like most sciences don't understand, like without fungi, they're, you know, their foundational pieces might not exist. And I'm not saying fungi is responsible for everything, because it definitely takes us, you know, a layering effect and a stacking effect, and like a combination of everything in situ and in syntropy to work together. That's really going to make the most effort and the most impact, in my opinion, on this planet. But just to think of like how little knowledge we have about this ancient ally of ours, right? Like I talked about, like that mycorrhizal mining could have likely been over 2 point something billion years ago, right?
Yeah.
And here we are as humans in 80 to 100 years, and we think we have this like idea of what's going on and with nature. And it's like, if you really put that into perspective, like your whole lifetime might be like Mother Nature's down blink when it woke up in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't even, I don't even think we get a full blink in our lifetime. We might get like a down blink of the picture. That's why, like, when I go back to talking about like saying parasitic, well, it's like this mushroom affecting this tree and this ecosystem, is it really like doing a parasitic act, or do we just like think that we understand in 100 years that like what's happening? Like this could be like part of a 100,000 year process that this forest is actually going through, right? And we see like 20, 30, you know, if you're a research field person, you might get 50 years if you're lucky in the fields interacting with these things, that it's in the middle of its 1,000-year cycle, 100,000-year cycle. Like what, we don't even really know. Like for us to say that this is like parasitic, it's like, oh, you know, invasive species, we call these things invasive species, but what are they invading? Are they invading their space back from us? Because like I see most invasive species around like roadways or what we consider invasive species, but like what do you think we did when we put this roadway right in like in a natural waterway? Like, isn't that a silly idea to build a road right where like water filters into from like its like main source, and then we're gonna like try to drive through that and then expect Mother Nature not to like react in a way where it's like, hey, I'm gonna like put all these obnoxious things and like grow crazy. And it's like, if you look at most systems in nature, like where the chaos comes is where the intervention has come, you know, in 10 or 15 years. Like I'm doing this thing with my yard. I've been trying to, I guess you would call it rewild or whatever, but it's like I first moved here and started mowing because that was what people are like, you need to mow the yard, David, you need to mow these weeds. And then, you know, I got in the ideas of permaculture and like holistic system management and things like that. And I was like, well, no, like that's not what I'm doing. I'm just like spreading these quote unquote invasive species or whatever. And like if you go drive out in the country and you look at the country, it's like naturalized itself, right? Like it might be desertified, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's a healthy system or whatever, but it's like it's naturalized, and the things that are growing there because that's the way nature intended it to be. You know, there's no intervention, you know. And like even in my yard, I can see where I dug 5 years ago and like these weeds come up in systems, right? Like the most recent interaction has like this consequence of like these really big weeds, right? And then like as the disturbance slowly fades away, like these different cycles, you know, it's like one of my teachers, Matt Powers, used to say, like, you know, weeds are reparative mechanisms. They're talking to us. They're telling us something, you know, they're telling us what's wrong in the ecosystem at the time, you know. And living in a desert, you know, I'm used to like not seeing a lot of diversity, but there is, you know. You go to the Southwest Museum of Biology and you look at Poaceae, which is like the grass family, and there's like lockers upon which means that there's hundreds and hundreds of species of just grass out here, you know. So like the biological diversity isn't lacking. It's just not what you're used to seeing in these like quote unquote healthy systems. And it's like, well, like who are we to say that it's like healthy or unhealthy, I suppose, is what I'm getting at. And like, I think that, it's great to have interaction with Mother Nature, and it's great, but to like feel like your solution is like the solution, or like, oh, this is what we should be doing, is like, I think a silly idea. And we should probably humble ourselves and try to remember that our whole lifetime is a down blink for Mother Earth, and so just like, whatever.
Well, it's like I coined this phrase. It's all about the biology, and like Matt Powers, and that Matt is an amazing man. He actually just had a regenerative chorus that he put on the last 4 days. People can go to all over the internet and check that out. The man's amazing. But it's that interaction. It's like when the fire goes through an area, and all of a sudden you have a type of mushroom that people love and pay huge money for, that pops up, and it's generally only in that particular type of mushroom comes up is after Mother Nature has went through and burnt things off. Although I'm drawing a total blank. I can see the mushroom in
Oh, the morel,
the
yeah.
morel.
Yeah.
There's somebody supposedly has conquered the system of where they can actually grow it indoors and have it live properly. But it's sometimes you need the destruction to have the growth to come back. And I think that's really what mycelium is it's repairing a lot of the things what we've done. Now, you were mentioning putting the highway through. What do you think about people that are building their houses on a floodplain where a normal occurrence is for it to flood? Like, and you wonder why you can't get insurance? I mean, duh.
Yeah, like, so like I'll just rewind a little bit about Our Future. Our Future, great conference. I think this is Matt's third year putting it on. I was actually invited to be on a mushroom panel on day 3. So if you go back to day 3 and you look at the mushroom panel, I was able to answer a few questions with a couple of my colleagues and fellow friends, Mandy Cork,
Fantastic.
William Padilla Brown. So yeah, it was a great time. I was really nervous. It was my first live audience like that. So yeah, I think it turned out great. But Our Future, tune in, like everything from soil ecology to just everything about our future and how we can make a difference. It's like you said, it's all about the biology, right? Like introducing the biome. Like I heard this theory about somebody hugging every person in the world and having that rich biology, right? It's like you want to interact with these other organisms. So I do encourage people to like go out in the woods and learn their plants, and like plant a small garden, even like get some seeds from some fruit you ate and just put it in a cup and try to see if you can sprout it. Just like the minimal interaction is like, again, it's just super, super important. There was a couple other
Well,
things
on that note, if somebody wants to get into mycology and growing mushrooms, what would you say would be their first step in growing mushrooms? Because like you're growing mushrooms on your farm, you're selling mushrooms on your website. So where would people start if they wanted to head that direction?
Yeah, I mean, YouTube University is probably going to be my number one suggestion on getting started with growing mushrooms. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of approachable methods, all over YouTube, all over these social media platforms. Like that's what I really try to suck out of these social media platforms, is like groups. There's a niche group for every single thing you want to do in the world. Just type it
Yep.
in Facebook, and there'll probably be 5 different groups and subsets of groups from that group. And granted, you got to take things with a grain of salt. You can't if you get involved in the community, then it just gets like this sticky bureaucracy, and people have their personal opinions, and like you can observe from a distance, call it a troll, whatever you want. Like go in there, click on the document section, search the document section, and a lot of these like moderators and professionals have laid these answers out for you. You don't have to do all the digging and stuff. Yeah, it's good to do the digging, and it's good to like get your hands dirty. And don't get me wrong, like if I didn't fail 1,000 times, I wouldn't have the success I had today, right? It's like they say, what's the difference between a master and a student? Well, the master's failed more times than the student has even tried, right? So
Right
keep that
on.
in mind, right? The master failed more than the student has even tried. And so I always try to humble myself and realize like, hey, like failure is part of the success. It's like you talked about like the succession of the forest burning down and whatever. It's like you think of the life cycle of a seed, right? The seed gets covered with darkness before it can reach to the light. So like put yourself in that seat. I'm not saying like go out there and do the scariest thing you can do and like
But you don't want us to bury ourselves? Oh, come on.
if your hand isn't working and you need to teach yourself how to use your hand and break out of that box like old Salma Hayek on Kill Bill, like get to it, just make sure someone's bringing you water in the hole in the food hole or something, but like do whatever you got to do to push yourself to that extreme. It's like you talked about, we're resilient. These mushrooms are resilient. Like people are resilient. Like the planet is resilient. Like, like Mother Earth. It's like when I feel like I have a hard time and I like need to get angry and shit, I remind myself, like, go outside, yell at Mother Earth, tell her everything you're going to tell her. And she's probably going to just like pat you on the back and be like, it's okay. Like I destroy humanity in a matter of seconds. You know what I mean? Like, the earthquake, tsunamis, like, again, we think we have this like, this lasting like, and it's now that down blink. Don't forget that down blink. That tsunami could come in your life at any moment, right? And it could just take it all away from you. And Mother Earth she's gonna keep rolling and doing the systems that she's been doing, and like I said, now it's the fungal frontier. Like mycology is like, it's happening. Medicine access is being more created. Cannabis legalization is like hitting the globe. There's like access to medicines are being, like older policies are being, I won't say like overlooked, but are being like shifted and changed. Speaking of policy shift, like the fungal preservation thing, a shout out to Juliana Furche, she in the Fungi Foundation. She's been doing amazing things for years. I've been following her work, but she has a whole movement called Flora Fauna Funga, right? And like funga is the term that in life sciences, funga is a recent term for the kingdom fungi, similar to the long-standing fauna for animals and flora for plants. The term was considered to be urgently needed in order to simplify projects oriented toward the implementation of educational and conservational goals, right? And so like you can go look up flora fauna funga, and she went to all of the policy writers and all the politicians, and she got it changed that now this is a part of the policy that like these endangered fungi can now protect ecological systems, that we can prove that this is an endangered species. And that's why it's so important for people to get involved and to start citizen science. Like citizen science is a movement. It's an empowering movement, especially for somebody like me who started with like, yeah, I have a degree and I like went to academia, but academia is not for me. Since I was a child, like academia just did not resonate with me. Like I tried and I tried and I tried, and like, people wanted me to go. I love my mother to death, but like I'm glad I stuck with school and I went to school and I went to college. I went to college because it was free. I mean, it would be a silly idea. Like you got good enough grades to go to college for free. Why would, that's just like wasting a resource. It's like, I tell my kids all the time, the only thing worse than not having food is throwing food away and wasting it. You know what I mean? Like if you think about that, the only thing worse than not having food is throwing food away. Next time you go to throw food away, like think about that. Like it's a simple thing to think about, but it hits hard because it's like, oh, they grew up telling us, oh, there's starving kids in this country or that country. I'm not going to single any country out, but like the reality is there's fucking starving people in the city 30 feet from me, 30 miles down the street. 3 in 5 families are struggling with food security. And now the way that the supply and the chain has gone, like I can't even believe how we can survive to eat. and it's not even good food that they're trying to feed us. It's shit, and it's like, and they make it so inaccessible, right? Like we're in a place in New Mexico where we have this wonderful program called Double Up Food Bucks, right? And it's like if you're on food stamps, and I've been there, and I'm there, and sometimes that happens, but you can go to the farmers market and they will literally give you double your money. That you can take
Oh,
$50
fantastic.
and they will give you $100 in coins, and they say, go get this nutritionally dense, amazing, locally grown food and fill your bellies. Now the problem is like, how do you pair the system with something like that? Like the people who created that system and are like giving access for people, that's amazing, right? But like the humane services sends out like a million flyers about a million garbage things. Like, put one of those flyers and educate the people that are on these systems that this is an available resource, and it's like marketing only goes so far on one end or the other. And so it's like, again, you have to work together. I've recently learned over the last few years, like, yeah, I want to do a million trillion things, and I have a million visions, and I have so much potential to do all these things, but I can't do it alone. I could sit here
Yeah.
and like pretend I can do it alone, but I'm gonna like do 20 of them half-assed. I'm never going to get anywhere. But if I can like build a team and create a community and work together and like create resources for other people that don't have those resources, right? That's the idea behind this community lab we're creating. That's the idea behind this festival that's going to be coming up in 2023. It's like, it's the idea to just bring everybody you can to lead by example. That's kind of been my role, and something I feel like, I put myself in. It's like, okay, you're here now, like, you tell people all these things, and yeah, anything you want to learn is on YouTube right
Yeah.
now. Like,
Well, now
there's
before we go too much further, I want to jump back. You said the community lab, and I know we'd spoken about that privately, but I think that's something that's very special that you're doing, my friend. And I want you to highlight the community lab and the education that you're offering to different individuals that they can get this education. But please, I want to make sure that people in your area can understand that what you're creating. So if you want to just please talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so like passionately, again, like going a little rewind in my story, I had all this passion to be involved in mycology, but it's like, okay, like if I really wanted to educate myself as a citizen scientist, like I did when I became the president and vice president of that club, like I did that for accolades because I'm not an academic. And if you look at my like amazing features here, like people are gonna look at me and they're gonna be like, whoa, what does this guy want to do with
I
anything?
look like Santa.
And so like nothing against people, but yeah, that's like our first impulse for most of the time. We see something and we react and we're like, oh, and like, so like having that title gave me this accolade, like, oh, I'm the president of the New Mexico Mycological Society. Most people thought I was an old dude and that was retired in my 60s with a bunch of free time. I just happened to be staying at home with my kids because my wife was, shout out to my beautiful wife. She was able to give me the opportunity to stay home, raise and interact with my kids while she worked to pay the bills. And I had never had that opportunity. So I took it, and I ran with it and I started doing all these different things, right? And I joined the club and I had time to say, yeah, I'll be the president. This is all volunteer work, by the way, right? I'm like, and it took a lot of my time, don't get me wrong, but it gave me the opportunity to open a lot of doors for myself. And seeing people like Alan Rockefeller and Matt Powers and William Padilla Brown, and like there's a couple other names that I can't think. They resonate a lot with me
Yeah.
because I see them the most and I learn from them the most. And like Alan created this awesome platform, Counterculture Labs in Oakland, right? And he created this space for people to come access these things like microscopes and flow hoods and like slides and pipettes and micropipettes and all the tips and all the precursors and all the chemicals it takes to like all the reagents it takes to have like react on a mushroom to look at it under this, and like, so that accessibility for me, even though I was an alumni of a university, it was like there was like one program at a national lab here in Los Alamos where they did like a monthly, you can come into the lab on the weekend and we'll show you around. And I never ended up following through with that, sad on my part, because I guess I got zoned in on what I was doing. And so like, yeah, creating a space for people like this, I think, is like huge in any community to like a, it's like, yeah, there is these resources in the university, in like this guy's biotech, processing lab down the road that, has these huge capitalist investors that you probably won't have access unless you spent 10 years of your life in academia. And like, nothing against that, but like, to me, sold a part of yourself that you may never get to return to, or it may take a really long time to get back to. I won't say like it's a bad thing to go into academia, but for me it wasn't a good thing, right? And so like, now I'm at a place where I've had like semi-profitable business. I still like don't get as much money as I want. I won't sit here and lie to anybody. I'm not making millions, but I'm working hard as shit to try to create space to where I can do that, so I can create an even bigger platform like this community lab. So like, when I teach classes, I have like people who are in academia that have got their master's degree in microbiology or biology, or like whatever have you, chemistry, or like, all these things. And they're trying to decide, they're 25, 26 years old, and they're trying to decide, like, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? And like, even just coming hanging out with me for the day, and me being like, yo, like, there's opportunity in this world that like, Matt has created just like an amazing opportunity. Like, I have to, credit him for a lot of like my motivation and enthusiasm, because I've been following and shadowing his work for a really, really long time. And so like, to have that enthusiasm, of course I'm an enthusiastic person, I won't discredit myself at all, but like, yeah,
Call the mushrooms.
yeah, and so like, all these opportunities, I just decided to not capitalize. That's sometimes all it takes is one little choice. Yeah, it's hard work, it's every day, but this lab is meant for anybody to come. You don't have to be an academic student. If you've never looked through a microscope, for me, like, yeah, I got a little kit when I was a kid, and I looked through it and like had some pre-made slides and shit, but never again. Not even in high school. Somehow I got past chemistry and like didn't have to take that, and like got good enough grades, and like worked the system in a way that I didn't have to do things I didn't want to do. I didn't look through a microscope until I was like maybe 26 at a mycology foray, with intention of like, wow, I'm looking at this like tiny spore. It's a little teeny micro organism, or little cell, And so it's like, whoa, all of a sudden, like, I have this ability to empower myself with something I may never even have got to see in this lifetime. So it's like, yo, you have your family and your kids, and you're in your 30s, and you've never looked through a microscope. I have like 100 different biological things that in my yard that you can take 10 steps out of the lab. You have to just essentially reserve space. This is also like my working space and my business and stuff. And so certain days I don't work on Sundays. I don't go in the lab. It's my family day. I dedicate my full self to my family and disconnect from work. And like, so soon that'll open up. Or like, even if I'm doing work, hopefully we can start teaching these classes. I'm just breaking the surface of like DNA, RNA sequencing, and learning how to do a lot of that. Got this machine called the Bento Labs, kind of on borrow donation for us right now, and we're gonna fully get into it when I buy this other piece. I did a crowdsourcing, got a little bit of extra money. We're gonna be able to buy this machine called the MinIon. MinIon is going to give us like 100% access to all these biological things, right? Not limit us to anything. And soon we'll open the resource to the cactus community, the cannabis community, like the aquaponics community, like whoever wants to come and use these resources that, maybe.
So where can people find links on your website? Where would they go to find you to gain access to the lab?
I mean, through the website right now. Just like reach out on any of the social media platforms. Probably the Art Farm UnIncorporated at gmail.com is like a good email if you're interested in doing that kind of stuff. I'm rebuilding, through the crowdsourcing. I learned a lot. And so I'm trying to rebuild the same thing through the crowdsourcing on the front end of the webpage. So where the money will just go directly into the farm and what we're doing. There'll be a donation section. You'll be able to like pledge for rewards if that's your kind of thing. But, the idea is like, this is fully self-propelled, fully self-funded. I don't have any grants. This crowdfunding is the only source of thing that I got, where like a year ago, this was literally like a shed in my backyard that I converted. We've painted, we've insulated, we put doors on it. We're working on getting 100% flow so we can get like 4x8 feet of laminar flow. So, any kind of lab procedure protocol, we'll have tons of petri dishes. I'm getting I just backed this company called Microposse. I don't exactly know how they say their name. There's a bunch of play on words there, but anyway, they're making autoclavable, reusable petri dishes. So that'll be like one of the things that the lab has. I already pre-ordered a box of 500. So, like we'll be able to reutilize some of these things. And we're teaming with other people and people I've met in and out of the industry on how to I just want to create access for little kids. I was able to work with the second graders this year at Dolores Gonzalez Elementary and taught a 5-week course on fungi, and like having them be able to maybe come to the lab and like experience a quick day, look through a microscope, see some cool bacterias and viruses and all kinds of different interesting things, right? That me and a lot of people may never even get to see, or I didn't get to see all the way until, like I said, my later 20s, and so it's all DIY. It's all like work in progress. It's, bear with me and the team. Again, like I said, it's like I'm learning to manage a team. I got my social media friend Julian, shout out to him. I got my guy Mac in the lab these days, and then I got like my production guy Dan, and so everybody's playing their part right now. Soon we'll be able to like get the lab fully functional. We'll be making the functional medicine that I've been wanting to make, and I really haven't got to hone in and tune in on. I got like vast libraries of books upon books upon books, like never discredited a book, even if it's from 1974. Like you might find the linchpin to changing the protocol that somebody thought was like an impossible, approachable protocol, like Matt's doing with this microscopy work and this epifluorescence and like seeing stuff in natural light and like blowing people's minds with this like that are like university level like masters in their trade, writing a new book that are data soil base. And it's like, whoa, like just like changing the whole like trajectory and the accessibility for people, right? And that's the empowerment of citizen science and social science, right? It's like putting the power back in the hands of the people. Like, again, not discrediting academia. I have friends who have done amazing research, but like I might not get to even experience that research in my lifetime. Unfortunately, it's because not on the choice of the person that's doing the research, but it's on the on the organization that funded the grant that wrote the paper that allowed him to do the research in the multi-million trillion dollar lab where it was accessible. Again, multi-million trillion dollar lab, like who has access to that? Not very many people. So even like a basement lab or like a clandestine, may you call it, lab, like just a community open source citizen lab can like change people's lives. And again, here I am, I'm 34 years old and I'm doing all this stuff and I haven't learned anything, in my opinion. Like again, I'm like midway towards the bottom of the down blink, a quarter of the way down the down blink if I'm lucky. I hope to get 100 years out of this little body if I work the biology right and I pair with all those biological microorganisms and all this beautiful like energy that's around us that we just have to be receptive to, and like don't be afraid to take the opportunity. Life is scary, but I mean, what's the other side? For me, like it's scarier to see what other people are doing. Again, nothing against anybody doing the system and the work that they have to do to get by today, but like to me, that's way fucking scarier to like pick up a piece of food and like not know like maybe a half of an ingredient in there because it's basically called vitamin A or D, but like the rest of the ingredients, like my whole life growing up, I had to look at shit and like try to decipher what I was eating. And like food freedom and food sovereignty, it was like the first move for me to like get to where I am today, you know, and paying attention to what I was putting into my microbiome, my mycobiome, right? People might not know that, but inside your microbiome, there's a little thing called a mycobiome, which is all that fungi and all of that yeast and all those little fungal lives that are living inside the microbiome. So again, it's like, how long have we been mining the mushrooms, mushrooms mining us? Like, you know, it's talking about the morels, you know, it's like, oh, it's unheard of to cultivate morels, but in Thailand they've been doing it for a really long time. But what they find out, like you said, like morels really like that damaged soil, right? And so what they're doing is they're like laying down a foundation and groundwork, and they're really coming in, they're sucking all these old resources, and they're like messing things up. So like they're noticing in these farms in Thailand that like you can only grow those morels in that same spot for a couple of years, and then now you're like mismanaging land and kind of destroying the land. So the idea in Thailand is like, well, how can we put the inputs back in that the mushrooms are taking out, so we don't have to keep uprooting and moving them? And so there's a further project now called the Danish Mushroom Project, or the Danish Morel Project, and those guys are growing them in containers indoors, and they're able to recreate the, you know, the biology in the soil, and create a system to where they're getting enormous flushes, right? It's like the cordyceps, you know, and like the entopathogenic fungi I was talking about, or the parasitic bug eating, zombie infecting. No, it's like, this is nature's response to a parasite, right? Like, say we have this red lace wing moth that's destroying orchards all on the East Coast, right? And the nature's response is like, no, I'm going to build this entopathogenic parasitic fungi that attacks only this host bug. And now you can isolate that fungi, and you can create like a horticultural implication, which Trad Cotter started a long time ago, right? And you can isolate these entopathogenic fungi, and then you can make something that infects only the host bug, and then you infect that bug, and then that bug flies back to the colony and now spreads it and infects the whole colony. And now, you know, like, now we're disrupting that whole horticulture industry that's literally spraying toxic poisons on our food for a really long time. And not only that, but toxic poisons in the whole ecosystem around us, you know, in the cities, in the waterways that we're drinking, you know. It's like, so yeah, you know, just, there's a whole lot I could talk forever about, you know?
And actually, speaking of that, we're actually over our hour time. We're going to have you back, David. Not necessarily on the Passion Within, but more on a strictly, you know, maybe a 3-hour show on mycology. But yeah, we're gonna have to end the show here pretty quick. And I just want to say thank you so much for your passion, your love of what you're doing, and giving back and creating this lab that people are going to be able to have access to, teaching the children, because the children are the future of our species. They're the fruits of our mycology. And I'm so happy that there are people like you and Matt Powers and so many others that are bringing this to light where we can take it to the next level. Blessings, my friend. I'm gonna stop you, and we'll definitely talk after the show. But I'm gonna tell people what's coming up as well. We've got Connor, the Terp Wizard, tomorrow on Tuesday. We've got Axina, who is a hypnotherapist, and she's going to talk to us about hypnotherapy and how we can relieve a lot of the stresses in our lives from hypnotherapy. We've got Nature's Summit coming with us on Wednesday, and then a new show called the Soil Masters, or Soil Matters, I'm sorry, with Leighton Morrison and Dr. Av Singh. That's going to be every Friday in the afternoon. So you guys are going to want to check that out. And I've got people reaching out. A lot of people want to be on the Passion Within. So we're going to have a lot more shows developing and coming out. I'm going to try to do 2, maybe even 3 shows a day with people that are passionate about what they're doing and giving back to the world. So stay tuned, everybody. David, blessings, brother. And I love what you're doing. And if there's anything I can do to help you and get the word out about what you're doing, stuff you have coming up for events, etc., don't hesitate to reach out. And you're doing what everybody needs to do, and that's help other and blessings.
One quick thing, you said events. We got the Southwest Funga Fest, the first
Yeah.
time ever. Me and my friend Julian are co-organizing this baby. It's going to be one of a kind, soil ecology, our database, like next level DNA, RNA, all the best educators, speakers that I know. So check that out, Southwest Funga Fest.
And Diane, go back and rewatch. This was an amazing show with an amazing man. But with that, guys, we're going to end the broadcast, and blessings, everybody. Everybody have a wonderful day. Share this information, share this channel, get it out to your friends, because this is the information that we need as a species to move forward. Anyway, guys, we love you all and have a wonderful day.